bear cub was tied to a kite in a storm. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The sky darkened over Pinewood Valley as charcoal clouds rolled in from the mountains, casting long shadows across the small town nestled between ancient oak trees. Rain pattered against window panes, soft at first, then growing more insistent as thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside a weathered cabin at the edge of town, 4-month-old Lily Barrett cooed softly in her crib, her tiny fingers reaching toward the mobile of woodland creatures spinning slowly above her. Her mother, Nora, hummed a gentle lullaby as she folded laundry nearby, occasionally glancing at the worsening weather outside. "It's going to be a bad one tonight," Nora whispered to herself, pulling the window shut as the wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the porch. The cabin creaked and groaned, sturdy but old, having weathered countless storms over decades. Lily gurgled happily, oblivious to nature's brewing tantrum outside. In the dense forest beyond their home, a young wolf pup trembled beneath a fallen log. Separated from his pack during their hunt, the small gray creature, no bigger than a house cat, whimpered as raindrops found their way through the cracks of his temporary shelter. His amber eyes darted nervously with each flash of lightning, his wet fur clinging to his thin frame. Too young to hunt effectively and too inexperienced to find his way back to the den, the pup faced a dangerous night ahead. Meanwhile, at the edge of town, a group of teenage boys huddled under the awning of an abandoned gas station. Their restless energy, trapped by the storm, was turning toward mischief. Jake Thornton, the oldest at 17, flicked his lighter repeatedly, the flame dancing momentarily before he snapped it shut. "This sucks," he muttered, kicking at a pebble. Friday night ruined because of this stupid storm. His friend Darren nodded in agreement, peering out at the rain. "My dad says it's going to get worse. Flash flood warnings and everything." The third boy, Marcus, had wandered toward the tree line, squinting into the darkness. "Hey," he called back, excitement edging into his voice. "I think I saw something move over here." The other boys joined him, their boredom momentarily forgotten. Jake shone his phone flashlight toward where Marcus was pointing, and the beam caught a pair of glowing eyes low to the ground. "Is that a dog?" Darren asked, taking a step forward. Jake shook his head. "Too small, maybe a fox or something." Marcus grabbed a stick. "Let's check it out." The three boys ventured into the rain, their curiosity overriding their desire to stay dry. The wolf pup, sensing danger, tried to retreat deeper into the forest, but his exhausted legs betrayed him. He stumbled, fell, and found himself surrounded by looming human figures. "It's a wolf!" Marcus exclaimed, his voice a mixture of surprise and excitement. "A baby wolf! No way!" Darren said, crouching down for a better look. "Wolves haven't been seen around here in years." Jake remained standing, his expression darkening with a dangerous idea. "You know what would be cool? Let's take it." "Take it where?" Darren asked, frowning. Jake smiled, the kind of smile that had preceded many troubling incidents in the past. "I've got something at home that would be perfect for a night like this." Back at the cabin, Nora's phone rang. The hospital was calling her in for an emergency shift. The storm had caused a pileup on the highway, and they needed all available nurses. She glanced at Lily, peacefully drifting to sleep, then at the window where rain now lashed violently against the glass. "I can't leave her alone," Nora said into the phone, her voice tight with worry. "What about your neighbor, Mrs. Finch?" the charge nurse asked. Nora hesitated, then nodded to herself. I'll see if she can come over. I'll call you back in 5 minutes." She hung up and quickly dialed her elderly neighbor, who agreed to come watch Lily. As she waited for Mrs. Finch to arrive, Nora packed her nursing bag and prepared a bottle for Lily, all while listening to the storm grow fiercer outside. The wind howled now, bending tree branches and rattling the shutters. Unknown to Nora, just beyond the tree line separating her property from the dense forest, the 3 boys were trudging through mud and rain, the terrified wolf pup now secured in Jake's backpack, its small head poking out, eyes wide with fear. "My dad's workshop is just through here," Jake said, pointing toward a shed barely visible through the sheets of rain. "That's where I kept all the stuff from summer camp." "What stuff?" Marcus asked, struggling to keep up. Jake's smile widened. "You'll see. This is going to be epic." Inside the backpack, the wolf pup whimpered softly, too exhausted and frightened to struggle anymore. Its pack would be searching, but in this storm, all sense would be washed away. As lightning split the sky and thunder shook the ground, the pup closed its eyes, trembling against the unfamiliar fabric surrounding it. And in her crib, little Lily stirred, her eyes opening briefly as if listening to something only she could hear, a distant cry carried on the howling wind, a sound that seemed to touch something primal and instinctive within her. Her tiny brow furrowed as another flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls of her nursery. The storm had only just begun, and already it was bringing together lives that would never have crossed paths otherwise. By morning, nothing would be the same in Pinewood Valley, not for Nora and Lily, not for the lost wolf pup, and certainly not for the 3 boys whose reckless decision was about to set in motion events none of them could have anticipated. Mrs. Finch arrived at Nora's cabin 15 minutes later, her gray hair plastered to her head from the short walk across the neighboring yard. Her raincoat dripped onto the welcome mat as Nora let her in, gratitude evident in her tired eyes. "Thank you so much for coming, Mrs. Finch. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't an emergency," Nora said, gathering her things. She peered through the kitchen window where the trees swayed violently in the wind. The forest seemed alive, writhing and twisting against the fury of the storm. "Nonsense, dear. You go save lives. Little Lily and I will be just fine." The older woman removed her wet coat and hung it by the door. "Though I must say, this is shaping up to be the worst storm we've had in years. The creek behind my house is already rising." Nora bit her lip, hesitating. "Maybe I should call back and tell them I can't come in." Mrs. Finch waved away her concern. "We'll be fine. This old cabin has weathered worse. Go on now." With a final glance at her sleeping daughter, Nora reluctantly headed out into the storm, her car's headlights barely cutting through the sheets of rain as she made her way down the muddy driveway. Meanwhile, the 3 boys had reached Jake's father's workshop, a corrugated metal building that stood separate from their main house. Jake fumbled with the key, his fingers cold and wet, before finally pushing open the door. The interior was dark except for the beam of his flashlight, which illuminated workbenches, power tools, and stacks of lumber. "Give me the wolf," Jake demanded, reaching for his backpack that Marcus now carried. Marcus hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "What are you going to do with it?" "Just show you something cool. Stop being such a baby." Jake snatched the backpack and carefully removed the trembling pup, holding it firmly by the scruff of its neck. The young wolf's legs dangled helplessly, its golden eyes wide with terror. Darren shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just let it go, man. Its mother's probably looking for it." "In this storm, no way. Besides, we're saving it," Jake said, setting the pup down on a workbench and keeping one hand on it to prevent escape. "It would have died out there. So, what's your plan?" Marcus asked, looking around the workshop nervously. Jake rummaged through a storage bin in the corner, eventually pulling out what looked like a large kite. A delta wing design with a 6-foot wingspan, constructed of ripstop nylon in bright red and blue colors. "Remember when my dad took us to that kite festival last summer?" Jake's eyes gleamed in the flashlight beam. "This baby can fly in almost any wind, and tonight we've got wind to spare." Darren's face paled as he understood. "You can't be serious." "What?" Marcus asked, still not getting it. Jake's smile widened as he pulled out a coil of thin, strong cord. "We're going to give this little guy the ride of his life." Outside, the wind howled even louder, as if nature itself was protesting the boy's cruel plan. In the dark forest between Jake's house and Nora's cabin, other eyes watched the storm. An adult female wolf, larger and more powerful than the average timber wolf. She moved like a shadow through the underbrush, her nose to the ground despite the rain washing away scents. This was the pup's mother, and she had tracked her lost young one for miles, her maternal instinct stronger than her fear of human territory. She paused at the edge of the clearing where Jake's father's workshop stood, her keen senses detecting her pup's fear, despite the building's walls and the storm's fury. Back at Nora's cabin, Mrs. Finch had settled into the rocking chair with a book, occasionally glancing at the sleeping Lily. The storm's intensity grew, with wind now screaming around the cabin's eaves and rain hammering against the windows like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. A particularly loud crack of thunder seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin, and Lily awoke with a start. Instead of crying as Mrs. Finch expected, the baby's eyes opened wide, alert and focused, as if listening. Her tiny head turned toward the window, and for a moment she seemed older somehow, aware in a way that babies shouldn't be. "What is it, little one?" Mrs. Finch cooed, approaching the crib. "Just a bit of thunder, nothing to be afraid of." But Lily wasn't afraid. Her gaze remained fixed on the window, her expression one of intense concentration. And then, softly at first but growing stronger, she began to make an unusual sound. Not a cry or a laugh, but something between a hum and a whine, eerily similar to the call of a wolf pup separated from its pack. Mrs. Finch frowned, never having heard such a sound from a baby before. "Lily, are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Outside the workshop, the mother wolf paced in agitation, sensing her pup's distress but wary of the human structure. Her instincts warred within her, the drive to protect her young, fighting against generations of learned fear of humans and their dwellings. Rain soaked through her thick coat, but she hardly noticed. Her entire being focused on her captured offspring. Inside, Jake had worked quickly, fashioning a crude harness from bungee cords and zip ties. The wolf pup struggled weakly as Jake secured the contraption around its small body. "This is messed up," Darren said, backing toward the door. "I don't want any part of this." "Don't be such a wimp," Jake snapped. "It's just a little fun. The wind will carry it up, we'll let it fly for a minute, then bring it back down. No harm done." "No harm?" Marcus finally found his voice, his initial excitement now replaced with growing horror. "Jake, that thing could die of fright, or the harness could break, and it could fall." Jake ignored them, continuing his work. The pup had gone strangely still, as if it knew struggling was useless. Its eyes, however, remained alert, watching the human's every move. "There," Jake said finally, holding up the kite with the pup now firmly attached to its center strut. "Let's try it out." "I'm out," Darren said firmly, reaching for the door handle. "This is sick, Jake." Jake's expression darkened. "Fine, leave. But if you tell anyone about this, I'll make your life hell. You know I will." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. Darren hesitated, then stepped outside into the rain, immediately disappearing into the darkness. Jake turned to Marcus. "You too? Or do you have the guts to see this through?" Marcus looked at the pup, then at his friend's challenging stare. I'll stay, but just to make sure the wolf doesn't get hurt." Jake smirked. "Whatever helps you sleep at night. Come on, there's a clearing behind the workshop that's perfect for launching." As they prepared to step outside with their cruel contraption, none of them noticed the pair of gleaming eyes watching from just beyond the workshop's window, nor did they hear the low, threatening growl that was lost in the storm's roar. At Nora's cabin, Lily's strange vocalizations had grown more insistent. Mrs. Finch had picked her up, checking her diaper and offering a bottle, but the baby refused both, her gaze still fixed on the window with an intensity that was beginning to unnerve the elderly woman. "What's gotten into you tonight?" Mrs. Finch murmured, pacing the floor with the baby in her arms. She approached the window and pulled back the curtain, peering into the stormy night. For a moment, she thought she saw movement at the forest's edge. A shadow darker than the rest, moving with purpose toward the neighboring property. She blinked, and it was gone, hidden again by the curtain of rain. Lily made that strange sound once more, louder now, almost urgent, and for the first time, Mrs. Finch felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Something wasn't right. She couldn't explain how she knew, but the certainty settled in her bones like an old ache. She reached for her cell phone, thinking perhaps she should call Nora. In the hospital emergency room, Nora moved from bed to bed, checking vitals and administering medications to the victims of the highway pileup. The casualties weren't as severe as initially feared. Mostly minor injuries with a few moderate cases requiring observation. As she updated a patient's chart, a strange feeling washed over her, a mother's intuition, powerful and insistent. She paused, pen hovering above paper, her thoughts flying to Lily. Something felt wrong. She glanced at the clock, only an hour into her shift. She couldn't leave yet, not with the ER still processing accident victims. Telling herself she was being paranoid, she tried to focus on her work, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing minute. Back at the workshop's edge, Jake and Marcus stood in the pouring rain. The Kite with its terrified passenger held high above Jake's head, ready for launch. The wind tugged at it violently, eager to claim this strange offering. "This is going to be epic," Jake shouted over the storm. "When I say go, let out the line steadily. Not too fast." Marcus nodded numbly, the spool of kite string clutched in his shaking hands. Part of him wanted to grab the pup and run, to end this cruelty before it began, but fear of Jake and his retaliation kept him rooted to the spot. Jake counted down. 3, 2, 1, go! He thrust the kite upward just as a powerful gust hit, and the contraption shot into the air with surprising speed, the wolf pup dangling beneath it, its small body illuminated briefly by a flash of lightning. A pitiful howl, high-pitched and terrified, cut through the storm's noise as the pup was carried higher, spinning slightly in the turbulent air. The sound seemed to trigger something primal in the night. From the darkness beyond the clearing came an answering howl, deeper, more powerful, filled with rage and determination. Jake and Marcus froze, the kite string still unspooling rapidly from Marcus's hands. "What was that?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Before Jake could answer, a massive shape burst from the tree line. The mother wolf, her fur slick with rain, teeth bared in a snarl that promised violence. She charged across the clearing with surprising speed, her focus entirely on the boys who had taken her pup. "Run!" Jake screamed, dropping his end of the kite string and bolting toward the workshop. Marcus stood paralyzed for a split second, then followed, the spool of string falling from his hands and rolling away, still attached to the airborne kite. They reached the workshop door just steps ahead of the wolf, slamming it shut and throwing the bolt. The wolf hurled herself against the metal door, the impact reverberating through the building. Again and again she attacked, snarls and growls penetrating even the storm's cacophony. Inside, the boys backed away from the door, their faces pale with terror. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "What about the wolf pup?" Outside, the kite continued to rise, carried higher and higher by the storm winds, the string now tangled in a tree at the edge of the clearing. The pup's cries grew fainter as it ascended into the dark clouds. The mother wolf, hearing her pup's distress, abandoned her assault on the door and raced toward the tree where the kite string was caught. She leaped at the lowest branches, trying desperately to reach the string, but it was too high. She paced beneath the tree, whining and howling, watching helplessly as her young one was carried away by the wind. In Nora's cabin, Lily suddenly let out a wail unlike anything Mrs. Finch had heard before. Not a cry of hunger or discomfort, but one of distress, as if the baby somehow sensed the unfolding tragedy. Mrs. Finch tried to comfort her, but Lily was inconsolable, her little body rigid in the elderly woman's arms, her gaze still fixed on the window. "Shh, it's all right," Mrs. Finch soothed, even as her own unease grew. She tried Nora's cell phone again, but the call wouldn't go through. The storm had likely affected the service. Making a decision, she bundled Lily in a warm blanket and placed her in the portable bassinet. "We're going to check that everything's all right outside and then we'll come right back in," she told the baby, though she knew Lily couldn't understand her words. Donning her still damp raincoat and grabbing a powerful flashlight from Nora's emergency drawer, Mrs. Finch stepped onto the covered porch with the bassinet, shielding Lily from the worst of the rain. She swept the flashlight beam across the yard, seeing nothing unusual at first. But as she turned toward their neighbor's property, the light caught on something strange in the sky. A large object buffeted by the wind, rising and falling erratically above the tree line. "What on earth?" Mrs. Finch murmured, squinting through the rain. Lily's crying suddenly stopped, replaced by the strange humming sound from earlier. The baby's eyes were wide, focused intently on the object in the sky. At that moment, a particularly violent gust tore through the valley, and the object, which Mrs. Finch now recognized as some kind of kite, was ripped from whatever had been anchoring it. It shot higher into the air, then began to drift rapidly in their direction, carried by the wind that seemed determined to bring it to them. As it drew closer, Mrs. Finch gasped in horror. There was something attached to the kite, something small and moving. The kite dipped suddenly, caught in a downdraft, and for a brief moment, the flashlight beam illuminated the struggling form of the wolf pup, still secured to the kite's frame, its strength clearly fading. "Dear God," Mrs. Finch whispered, her free hand covering her mouth. The kite continued its erratic journey, rising again before being slammed downward by another gust. This time, it didn't rise again, but instead crashed into the branches of the massive oak tree that stood at the edge of Nora's property, about 50 feet from the porch. The wolf pup hung suspended, the kite tangled in the upper branches, too high for Mrs. Finch to reach. Lily's strange vocalizations grew louder, more insistent, and from the darkness beyond the yard came an answering call. The mother wolf, who had followed the kite's path through the storm, driven by maternal instinct that would not be denied. Mrs. Finch saw the wolf emerge from the shadows, a silver-gray phantom materializing from the rain. Her first instinct was fear. She clutched Lily's bassinet closer, ready to retreat into the house. But something made her pause. The wolf wasn't looking at them. Her attention was fixed on the tree where her pup was trapped. In the distance, shouts could be heard. Jake and Marcus had ventured out of the workshop, realizing with horror where the wind had carried their cruel experiment. They were running toward Nora's property, flashlight beams bouncing wildly as they struggled through the mud. Mrs. Finch stood frozen on the porch, caught between multiple dangers. The storm raging around them, the wild predator in the yard, and the approaching teenagers whose shouts carried notes of panic. Lily, however, showed no fear. Her strange calling had stopped, and she was silent now, watching the unfolding scene with an awareness that seemed impossible for her age. The mother wolf circled the base of the tree, whining and leaping futilely at the lower branches. The pup's movements were growing weaker, its small body battered by the wind and rain. Time was running out. Without fully understanding why, Mrs. Finch made a decision that defied all logic and self-preservation. She gently placed Lily's bassinet in the corner of the porch, sheltered from the rain by the overhang, and picked up a ladder that Nora kept leaning against the side of the cabin for cleaning the gutters. "Stay here, little one," she whispered to Lily. "I can't just watch this happen." The mother wolf noticed the elderly woman's approach and bared her teeth, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Mrs. Finch stopped, her heart pounding. "I want to help," she said softly, knowing the wolf couldn't understand her words, but hoping somehow to convey her intentions. "Your baby needs help." Whether by miracle or simply because the wolf's focus was entirely on her pup, the predator didn't attack. She backed away slightly, watching with wary eyes as Mrs. Finch positioned the ladder against the tree trunk. The rungs were slippery with rain, and her old bones protested as she began to climb, the flashlight clenched between her teeth. Jake and Marcus had reached the edge of the yard now, stopping short when they saw the wolf and the elderly woman on the ladder. "Mrs. Finch," Marcus called out, "be careful. There's a wolf." "I can see that perfectly well," Mrs. Finch called back, her voice stern despite her precarious position. "What I want to know is why there's a poor animal tied to a kite in the middle of a storm." The boys fell silent, their guilt evident even through the darkness and rain. Mrs. Finch had reached as high as the ladder would take her, but the pup was still about 10 feet above her, the kite tangled in branches she couldn't reach. She shone her flashlight on the small creature, seeing how the crude harness cut into its fur, how its chest heaved with labored breaths. "I can't reach it," she called down, despair creeping into her voice. Below, the mother wolf paced anxiously, her gaze moving between her pup and the human trying to help. Then, surprising everyone, she approached the tree and began to climb, using her powerful claws to grip the bark, ascending with a determination that defied her species' normal behavior. Mrs. Finch watched in amazement as the wolf made her way up the trunk, bypassing the ladder and continuing higher, branch by branch, moving with a grace that belied her size. When she reached the level of the trapped pup, she inched carefully along a thick branch, her balance perfect despite the wind that threatened to dislodge her. Jake and Marcus stood transfixed, unable to believe what they were seeing. "This isn't possible," Jake muttered. "Wolves don't climb trees like that." But this wolf, driven by maternal love and desperation, was doing exactly that. She reached her pup and began gently chewing at the bindings that held it to the kite, her sharp teeth making quick work of the zip ties and cord. Mrs. Finch, still on the ladder, shone her light to help the wolf see better. It was in surreal collaboration, human and wild predator working together to save a life. With a final snap, the pup was free. It whimpered weakly as its mother took its scruff gently in her mouth. The return journey would be tricky, especially with her pup in her jaws, But the mother wolf seemed undaunted. Branch by branch, she made her careful descent. Mrs. Finch climbed down as well, her joints aching from the cold and exertion. When she reached the ground, she backed away, giving the wolf space to complete her rescue. The mother wolf reached the lowest branch and hesitated, still 15 feet above the ground, too far to jump safely while carrying her pup. She looked down, assessing, then back at her young one, who had gone still in her grasp. "The branch over there," Mrs. Finch called to the boys, pointing. "It's lower. Guide her toward it with your flashlights." Too shocked to argue, Jake and Marcus directed their beams as instructed, illuminating a path to a section where the branch dipped lower, perhaps only 8 feet from the ground. The wolf followed the light, moving cautiously to the spot. It was still a dangerous drop, but with no other options, the mother tensed her muscles and leaped, twisting in midair to absorb the impact with her body, protecting her pup. She landed hard, but maintained her grip on her young one, immediately scrambling to her feet. For a moment, the wolf stood there in the rain, her golden eyes meeting Mrs. Finch's. There seemed to be an understanding between them, an acknowledgement that transcended the natural boundaries between their species. Then the wolf turned and began to lope toward the forest, her precious burden secure in her jaws. "Wait!" Jake suddenly called out, his voice cracking. I'm sorry." The wolf paused, looking back at the boy who had caused her pup so much suffering. Her gaze was neither forgiving nor condemning, simply wild, unfathomable. Then she disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind 3 humans standing in the rain, forever changed by what they had witnessed. On the porch, baby Lily cooed softly, a sound of contentment that seemed to mirror the resolved tension of the rescue. Mrs. Finch hurried back to her, checking that she was still dry and warm in her sheltered corner. "You saw it all, didn't you, little one?" she murmured, lifting the bassinet. "Something quite extraordinary." She turned to the 2 boys, who stood awkwardly in the yard, rain streaming down their faces, mixing with what might have been tears. "Come inside," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We need to have a serious talk about responsibility and respect for life. And then you'll wait here until Lily's mother returns." As they trudged toward the porch, a distant howl echoed through the valley. The mother wolf, perhaps, announcing her pup's rescue to her pack, or simply expressing a joy that needed voice. And in Mrs. Finch's arms, Lily made that strange humming sound once more, as if in answer. The storm was beginning to ease, the wind dying down, the rain softening to a gentle patter. By the time Nora would return home, the skies would be clear again, the stars bright in the washed clean air, but the night's events would linger, a story that would be told and retold in Pinewood Valley for years to come. The night a baby seemed to call to a wolf, and an old woman braved the storm to help a mother save her child. Dawn broke over Pinewood Valley, painting the sky in gentle pinks and golds that belied the violence of the previous night's storm. Nora's car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching over fallen twigs and debris. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion after the long shift, but her mind was still buzzing with the strange feeling that had plagued her all night, that something significant had happened in her absence. The sight that greeted her as she entered her cabin confirmed that intuition. Mrs. Finch sat in the rocking chair, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. But what surprised Nora were the 2 teenage boys asleep on her living room floor, wrapped in spare blankets. "Mrs. Finch," Nora whispered, setting down her bag. "What's going on? Who are these boys?" The elderly woman looked up, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept at all. "Oh, Nora, dear, we've had quite a night." Her voice was soft, but carried an undercurrent of something. Awe, perhaps, or lingering disbelief at what she had witnessed. As Mrs. Finch recounted the events, the wolf pup tied to the kite, the mother wolf's determination, the rescue operation, Nora's expression shifted from skepticism to shock. She glanced at the sleeping boys, anger flaring briefly before being tempered by the knowledge that they had remained, facing the consequences of their actions rather than running away. "It sounds impossible," Nora finally said, taking Lily from Mrs. Finch's arms and holding her close, as if to reassure herself that her daughter was truly safe. "I would have thought so too, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes," Mrs. Finch replied. She stood slowly, her joints stiff from the night in the chair. But the strangest part was Lily, the sounds she was making. Nora. It was as if she knew what was happening, as if she was calling to them somehow. Nora looked down at her sleeping baby, so small and innocent. "That's just not possible. She's only 4 months old." "I know what I heard," Mrs. Finch said gently. "And the wolf heard it too. There was a connection there that I can't explain." Before Nora could respond, one of the boys, Marcus, stirred and sat up, rubbing his eyes. He looked momentarily confused, then remembered where he was and why. His face flushed with shame. "Mrs. Barrett," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. "I'm really sorry about what happened. It was wrong, and I should have stopped it." Jake woke at the sound of voices, his expression guarded as he took in the room. Unlike Marcus, he didn't immediately apologize, but the haunted look in his eyes suggested the night's events had affected him deeply. "Your friend Darren came by earlier this morning," Mrs. Finch informed them. "He was worried about you two. He's agreed to come back with his father after school to speak with both your parents." Jake's face paled, but he nodded, accepting the inevitable consequences. "I want to understand why," Nora said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Why would you do something so cruel to a defenseless animal?" The boys exchanged glances, and it was Jake who finally answered, his usual bravado absent. "I don't know. It seemed funny at first, then exciting because it was dangerous. I didn't really think about the wolf as a real thing with feelings. It was just an object for our entertainment." He looked down at his hands. "But when I saw its mother climb that tree, the way she was so determined to save it, it made me realize—" His voice trailed off. "That all mothers love their children," Mrs. Finch finished for him. "That's not unique to humans." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room, broken only by Lily, who stirred in her mother's arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, seemingly taking in each face before her gaze turned to the window, to the forest beyond. "I should get these boys home," Mrs. Finch said. "Their parents must be worried sick." "I'll drive them," Nora offered. "It's the least I can do after you spent the night protecting my daughter." As they prepared to leave, loading into Nora's car, Lily began to make that strange humming sound again. Nora frowned, never having heard such a vocalization from her before. "That's it," Mrs. Finch said, her eyes widening. "That's the sound she was making last night just before the wolf appeared." Jake and Marcus exchanged uneasy glances from the back seat. "It's just baby babble," Nora said, but a chill ran down her spine nonetheless. She secured Lily in her car seat and drove the short distance to Jake's house, where they found his parents on the front porch, their faces lined with worry that quickly turned to relief, then sternness when Jake explained where he'd been and why. After dropping Marcus off as well, with similar parental reactions, Nora returned home with Lily. Mrs. Finch had insisted on staying to clean up, despite Nora's protests that she should go home and rest. "I'll just tidy a bit, then be on my way," the older woman said, already gathering the blankets the boys had used. Nora carried Lily to the nursery, planning to put her down for a proper nap, but the baby was wide awake and alert, that strange sound still occasionally emanating from her tiny lips. On impulse, Nora took her to the window that overlooked the forest and held her up so she could see out. "What are you looking for, little one?" she murmured. For a long moment, they both gazed at the tree line, where morning mist still clung to the underbrush. And then, so briefly that Nora almost thought she'd imagined it, a pair of wolves emerged from the shadows, the mother and her pup, now reunited with their pack. The adult wolf paused, looking directly at the cabin window as if she could see them watching. The pup, seemingly recovered from its ordeal, playfully nipped at its mother's tail. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished back into the forest depths. Lily had gone completely still in Nora's arms. Her strange vocalizations ceased. A smile played at the corners of her tiny mouth, and she reached one hand toward the window, her fingers spreading as if in greeting or farewell. "Did you see that?" Nora called to Mrs. Finch, her voice shaking slightly. The elderly woman came to stand beside them, nodding slowly. "They came to say goodbye, I think, or perhaps to show us that the little one is all right. But how did they know where to find us? How did they know which window to look at?" Nora's scientific mind struggled to make sense of what she was witnessing. Mrs. Finch placed a gnarled hand on Lily's head, smoothing her soft hair. "Some things can't be explained with logic, dear. Some connections run deeper than reason." As the day progressed and life began to return to normal, Nora found herself watching her daughter with new eyes, wondering what other mysteries might lie behind those innocent features. Lily never made the wolf-like sound again after that morning, returning to her usual baby babbles and coos, but sometimes when the wind blew from the forest, she would grow quiet and attentive, her head turning toward the sound as if listening to a voice only she could hear. In the weeks that followed, changes rippled through Pinewood Valley. Jake and Marcus, along with Darren, were assigned community service at the local wildlife rehabilitation center as punishment for their actions. To everyone's surprise, Jake showed a particular aptitude for working with injured animals. His former cruelty transformed into a gentle patience that the center's staff found remarkable. "It's like he's a completely different person," the center director told Nora when she brought Lily for a visit. "He has a special way with the wolf hybrids especially. It's almost like they recognize him." The boys had also taken it upon themselves to visit Nora's cabin regularly, helping with yard work and repairs that had been neglected since Lily's father had passed away the previous year. It was their way of making amends, not just to the Wolf family, but to Mrs. Finch and Nora as well, for the fear and chaos they had caused that stormy night. As for the wolves, they were spotted occasionally by hikers and rangers, always at a safe distance. The Park Service confirmed what locals had suspected for years. Wolves were indeed returning to the region after decades of absence, reclaiming their ancestral territory. Efforts to protect them gained new support, with Jake's father, a town council member, unexpectedly becoming one of their most vocal advocates. Life continued its steady rhythm in Pinewood Valley, but something fundamental had shifted, a reconnection with the wild world that surrounded their small community. And at the heart of this change was the story that spread from person to person, growing perhaps in the telling, but never losing its essential truth, of a night when storm winds carried a wolf pup to a baby's window, and how two mothers from different worlds found common ground in their love for their children. Nora documented everything in a journal, recording each detail while it was still fresh in her mind. She wasn't entirely sure why, only that it felt important to preserve the memory of that night for Lily when she grew older. Perhaps one day her daughter would understand the significance of what had happened, of the mysterious connection she seemed to share with the forest and its inhabitants. 6 months after the storm, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Nora took Lily for a walk along the forest edge. The baby was sitting up on her own now, her personality emerging more each day. Curious, determined, with a particular affinity for the outdoors that Nora encouraged despite her own lingering wariness of the wilderness. They stopped at the oak tree where the wolf pup had been trapped that night. New leaves had long since replaced those damaged in the storm, and the tree stood tall and unblemished, showing no signs of the drama that had unfolded in its branches. "This is where it happened," Nora told Lily, though she knew her daughter was too young to understand the words. Lily reached out toward the tree, her small fingers grasping at the air. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above them. For a moment, Nora thought she heard something. A distant howl, perhaps, or just her imagination playing tricks. But Lily heard it too. Her head turned sharply toward the sound, her eyes widening with recognition. And then Nora saw it, movement at the forest edge, a flash of silver-gray fur between the trees. She instinctively clutched Lily closer, her heart racing. But Lily showed no fear, instead babbling excitedly and reaching toward the trees. The mother wolf emerged from the shadows, more cautious in daylight than she had been in the desperate circumstances of the storm. She stood perfectly still, watching them from a safe distance. Behind her, partially hidden by undergrowth, her pup, now noticeably larger, peeked out curiously. "It's okay," Nora whispered, more to herself than to Lily or the wolves. "We're just visiting." The mother wolf took a few steps forward, then stopped again, her golden eyes fixed not on Nora, but on Lily. There was intelligence in that gaze, an awareness that transcended the expected boundaries between wild animal and human. The wolf tilted her head slightly, as if considering something profound. Lily had gone quiet in Nora's arms, her usual squirminess replaced by an unusual stillness. Then, to Nora's astonishment, her daughter made that strange humming sound again, the wolf call that had preceded the rescue 6 months ago. It was softer now, almost conversational rather than urgent, but unmistakably the same vocalization. The mother wolf's ears perked forward, and she took another cautious step toward them. The pup, emboldened by its mother's approach, bounded out from its hiding place and moved to stand beside her, its youthful curiosity evident in every line of its body. Nora held her breath, frozen between fear and wonder. This was wild animals, not pets, yet the moment felt less like a potential danger and more like a reunion of old friends. The wolf and her pup came no closer, maintaining a respectful distance. After what seemed like an eternity but was likely only minutes, the mother wolf made a soft chuffing sound. The pup looked up at her, then back at Lily and Nora, before both turned and melted back into the forest, their movements silent and graceful. Only when they had disappeared completely did Nora exhale, her arms trembling slightly as the tension left her body. "Did that really just happen?" she murmured to Lily, who was now happily babbling in her normal baby voice, the wolf call gone as quickly as it had come. On their walk back to the cabin, Nora's mind raced with questions. The encounter had felt deliberate, almost planned, as if the wolves had been waiting for them, but that was impossible. Wasn't it? As they approached the cabin, Nora spotted Mrs. Finch on her porch next door, watering potted chrysanthemums that added bright bursts of color to the autumn landscape. The elderly woman waved, setting down her watering can and making her way to the fence that separated their properties. "How was your walk, dears?" she called. Something in Nora's expression must have given her away, because Mrs. Finch's smile faltered. "What happened? Is everything all right?" "We saw them," Nora said simply. "The wolves. They came right to the edge of the clearing. And Lily." She made that sound again. Mrs. Finch didn't look surprised. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had long suspected. "I thought they might find you. There's a bond there, though I can't claim to understand it." "This isn't normal, Mrs. Finch. Wild wolves don't seek out human contact, and babies don't communicate with animals." Nora's scientific mind was still struggling to rationalize what she had witnessed. The older woman's eyes crinkled with gentle amusement. "Normal is a very limited concept, my dear. There are more mysteries in this world than our small minds can comprehend." She reached over the fence to touch Lily's cheek. "This little one has a gift. Whether it lasts into adulthood or fades with childhood, only time will tell. But I wouldn't be too quick to dismiss it as impossible." That evening, as Nora put Lily to bed, she found herself lingering by the nursery window, gazing out at the forest, now silvered by moonlight. The rational part of her brain insisted there must be a logical explanation for everything. The wolves' behavior, Lily's strange vocalizations, the sense of connection that transcended species. Perhaps the mother wolf simply recognized their sense from that night in the storm. Perhaps Lily's sounds were just normal developmental experimentation. But in her heart, Nora knew there was something more at work, something beyond the boundaries of her medical training and scientific understanding. She thought of her late husband, Michael, who had loved these forests deeply. He had been a wildlife biologist, dedicated to studying the region's ecosystem. How fascinated he would have been by these events, by the possibility that their daughter shared his profound connection to the natural world. The thought brought both comfort and a fresh wave of grief that he wasn't there to witness it. "Your daddy would have understood," she whispered to the sleeping Lily. "He always said there were languages in nature that humans had forgotten how to speak." Winter came to Pinewood Valley with a vengeance that year, bringing heavy snowfall and temperatures that plunged well below freezing. The forest stood silent under its white blanket, the trees like sentinels wrapped in ermine cloaks. Nora had taken a leave of absence from the hospital, wanting to spend more time with Lily, whose first birthday was approaching. The cabin was cozy despite the cold outside, wood smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with warm light that spilled out onto the snow. Jake, Marcus, and Darren continued their community service at the Wildlife Center throughout the winter, their initial reluctance having transformed into genuine interest and commitment. Jake, especially, had become something of a protege to the center's director, his natural affinity for animals developing into a potential career path. It was Jake who brought the news one blustery December afternoon, arriving at Nora's cabin with a troubled expression that instantly put her on alert. "What's wrong?" she asked, inviting him in from the cold. He stamped snow from his boots and removed his heavy jacket before answering. "Poachers," he said grimly. "They've been spotted in the northern section of the forest. The rangers found snares and tracking signs yesterday." Nora's stomach clenched. "What are they after?" "Wolves, mainly. There's a black market for pelts and parts." Jake's disgust was evident in his voice. With the pack establishing territory here, they've become targets. The thought of the mother wolf and her pup, now adolescent, caught in a poacher's trap was horrifying. Nora glanced toward the nursery where Lily was napping. "Have the rangers notified the sheriff?" Jake nodded. "They're increasing patrols, but the forest is vast, and they're understaffed, especially in winter." He hesitated, then continued. The center director thinks the pack may have to be relocated for their own safety. There's a sanctuary in Montana that might take them. Relocated? The word felt like a physical blow. Though she had only seen the wolves a handful of times since that night in the storm, Nora had grown accustomed to their presence, to the knowledge that they moved through the same landscape, shared the same valley. And what about Lily's mysterious connection to them? Would that be severed if they were taken away? It's just an option they're considering, Jake assured her. Nothing's decided yet. After he left, Nora found herself drawn to the window, scanning the tree line as if expecting to see the wolves appear, to somehow warn them of the danger. But the forest remained still and empty, the snow surface unbroken by tracks. That night, Lily was restless, waking frequently with a distress that seemed to have no physical cause. No fever, no teething pain, nothing Nora could identify. Yet the baby fussed and whimpered, her eyes often turning toward the window, her little face scrunched with what almost looked like worry. By morning, dark circles underscored Nora's eyes, evidence of her sleepless night. She moved through her morning routine in a fog of exhaustion, grateful that at least Lily had finally settled into peaceful sleep just before dawn. The sharp knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Mrs. Finch, unusually agitated, her gray hair escaping from its usual neat bun. "Turn on your radio," the elderly woman said without preamble. "Channel 4. Puzzled, Nora did as instructed, tuning the old kitchen radio to the local station. The news was halfway through a report. Confirmed that 3 men have been arrested in connection with illegal poaching activities in Pinewood Forest. Authorities were alerted by an anonymous tip that led them to a campsite where they discovered illegal firearms, trapping equipment, and the pelts of several protected species. "They caught them," Nora said, relief washing over her. "That's good news." But Mrs. Finch's expression remained troubled. "There's more. Keep listening." The report continued. In a strange twist, rangers report that they were led to the poachers' location by what appeared to be wolf tracks in the snow. According to Chief Ranger Wilson, the tracks formed an unusual pattern that seemed deliberately designed to attract attention, circling a specific area repeatedly before leading directly to the poachers' hidden camp. "That can't be right," Nora said, frowning. "Wolves wouldn't deliberately expose poachers?" "No, normally they wouldn't," Mrs. Finch agreed. "But these aren't normal wolves, are they? Not since that night in the storm." Before Nora could respond, Lily's cry echoed from the nursery. She hurried to check on her daughter, finding her standing in her crib, clinging to the rails, her face tear-streaked, but her eyes alert. "What is it, baby girl?" Nora crooned, lifting her daughter into her arms. "Did you have a bad dream?" Lily didn't settle as she usually did when held. Instead, she squirmed, pointing insistently toward the window. Nora carried her over, pulling back the curtain to reveal the snow-covered yard and the forest beyond. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then, a movement caught her eye. Something dark against the snow, approaching from the tree line. Not one figure, but several, moving in formation. The wolf pack emerged from the forest edge, 5 strong now, with the mother wolf still clearly the leader. They moved with purpose, stopping at the edge of Nora's yard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. In their midst was the pup from the storm, now nearly grown, its coat thicker and more luxuriant than when Nora had last seen it. Mrs. Finch had followed them into the nursery, and now stood beside Nora at the window. "They've come to say goodbye," she said softly. "What do you mean?" Nora asked, though a part of her already knew. "They're leaving the valley. After exposing the poachers, it's too dangerous for them to stay. Humans will be looking for them now, studying them, tracking them. They need to find more remote territory. How could you possibly know that? Mrs. Finch didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "Open the window, just a crack. Let Lily say goodbye." Though it went against all logical caution to open a window with wild predators outside, Nora found herself complying. She unlatched the window and opened it just a few inches, enough for the cold air to rush in, carrying with it the sense of pine and snow and wild things. Lily immediately made that humming, calling sound, louder and more complex than Nora had ever heard it before. It rose and fell in what almost seemed like phrases or sentences, a language known only to her and the creatures watching from the yard. The mother wolf raised her head, her golden eyes fixed on Lily. She answered with a soft howl, the sound neither threatening nor mournful, but somehow conversational. The other wolves joined in, creating a harmony that made the hairs on Nora's arms stand up, not with fear, but with awe. For nearly a minute, this strange exchange continued. Lily's infant vocalizations and the wolves' responses, a dialogue across the divide of species. Then, as if a decision had been reached or a farewell completed, the mother wolf turned, glancing once more at the window before leading her pack back toward the forest. They moved with fluid grace, leaving a pattern of paw prints in the pristine snow, soon to be covered by the flakes that had begun to fall again. Lily watched them go, her calling sounds fading to silence. She leaned her head against Nora's shoulder, suddenly tired, as if the exchange had depleted her energy. But there was no distress in her expression now, only a calm acceptance that seemed far beyond her years. "I don't understand any of this," Nora confessed, closing the window and turning to Mrs. Finch. "How did you know they were leaving? How is any of this possible?" The elderly woman's eyes held ancient wisdom, accumulated through decades of observing the world with an open mind and heart. "There are connections in this world that science has yet to explain, Nora. Your husband understood that, I think. His research was beginning to explore the intelligence of wolves, the complexity of their social structures and communication." Nora was startled. "How did you know about Michael's research?" Mrs. Finch smiled gently. "We talked often, when he would walk in the forest near my property. He shared his theories with me, knowing I wouldn't dismiss them as many of his colleagues did. He believed there was a time when humans and animals shared a deeper understanding, a common language lost over centuries of separation and domestication." The revelation added another layer to the mystery, suggesting that perhaps Michael's work had somehow manifested in their daughter, a genetic predisposition to reconnect with the wild in ways most humans could not. "Will they be safe?" Nora asked, looking out at the now empty yard, the wolves' tracks already beginning to fill with fresh snow. "Safer than they would be here," Mrs. Finch replied. "They're intelligent and adaptable. They exposed the poachers not just for revenge but as a strategic move, eliminating a threat before departing." That evening, after Mrs. Finch had gone home and Lily was asleep, Nora found herself drawn to the boxes of Michael's research materials that she had stored in the attic after his death. She hadn't been able to face them before, but now she felt compelled to search for answers, for some context to make sense of everything that had happened. Hours passed as she pored over field notes, journal articles, and recordings of wolf vocalizations. Michael's handwriting filled notebook after notebook, familiar and yet now seen through new eyes. His observations were meticulous, his theories carefully constructed, but pushing the boundaries of conventional wildlife biology. One passage in particular caught her attention. "There is evidence suggesting that human infants, before being fully socialized into human language patterns, retain a capacity for interspecies communication that adults have lost." Their vocalizations sometimes mimic animal calls with surprising accuracy, and some researchers have observed unusual responses from wild animals to these infantile sounds. Is it possible that our youngest members retain an ancestral connection to the natural world that fades as they acquire human language? The theory was speculative, marked with Michael's characteristic caution. Requires further research, he had noted in the margin, but it offered a framework for understanding what she had witnessed with Lily and the wolves. Nora continued reading late into the night, finding more pieces of the puzzle in Michael's work. His final research proposal, never submitted due to his untimely death, outlined a study of wolf-human interactions in indigenous communities where traditional relationships with wolves had been maintained for generations. These communities report incidents of mutual aid and communication that defy conventional scientific explanation, he had written. Yet the consistency of these accounts across different cultural contexts suggests there may be underlying biological mechanisms at work, perhaps linked to vocalizations that operate below the threshold of conscious human awareness. It was nearly dawn when Nora finally closed the last notebook, her mind racing with implications. Michael had been on the cusp of something revolutionary, a new understanding of the connections between species, a challenge to the artificial boundaries humans had constructed between themselves and the natural world. And somehow, through forces no one could have predicted, their daughter had become living proof of his theories. A soft sound drew her attention to the baby monitor. Lily was awake, not crying but making gentle cooing sounds. Nora went to the nursery, finding her daughter standing in her crib again, gazing out at the lightening sky where the first hints of sunrise painted the snow-covered landscape in pastel hues. "They're gone now, aren't they?" Nora said softly, lifting Lily into her arms. "But I think they left us with something important, a reminder that we're not as separate from the wild as we pretend to be." Lily smiled, reaching up to touch her mother's face with tiny fingers. For an instant, Nora thought she saw something in her daughter's eyes, a wisdom, an awareness that seemed to transcend her tender age. Then it was gone, and she was simply a baby again, warm and solid in her mother's embrace. Outside, the valley was quiet, the storm having passed during the night. The forest stood serene in its winter mantle, giving no indication of the extraordinary events that had unfolded within its boundaries. But Nora knew the valley had been changed, and so had they. Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softened earth. Lily was walking now, toddling determinedly across the cabin floor, and, when weather permitted, in the yard under Nora's watchful eye. The wolf pack had not returned, though occasionally hikers in the more remote sections of the forest reported sightings. They seemed to have established a new territory deeper in the wilderness, away from the areas most frequented by humans. Jake had graduated from high school and, inspired by his community service, enrolled in a wildlife management program at the state university. Before leaving for his freshman year, he visited Nora and Lily one last time, bringing a hand-carved wooden wolf as a gift for the little girl. "I wanted to thank you both," he said, watching as Lily examined the carving with delight. "What happened that night changed my life, made me see things differently." "You're the one who did the hard work of changing," Nora pointed out. "Many people would have just tried to forget the whole thing." Jake shook his head. "I couldn't forget even if I wanted to. Watching that mother wolf climb the tree for her pup, it was like seeing love in its purest form." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The center director has been helping me design a research project on wolf behavior. I want to continue the work your husband started." The mention of Michael brought a pang of bittersweet emotion. "He would have been pleased," Nora said. "His research materials are yours if you want them." They should be used, not sitting in boxes in my attic. Jake's eyes widened at the offer. Are you serious? That would be incredible. They spent the afternoon going through Michael's notes together, with Lily playing contentedly at their feet, occasionally making sounds that, to a careful listener, might have echoed the cadences of a wolf's call. The vocalization was becoming less frequent as her human language skills developed, just as Michael had theorized it would. That night, after Jake had left with a box of selected materials and promises to stay in touch, Nora sat on the porch watching the stars emerge, Lily asleep on her lap. The forest was alive with the sounds of spring. Frogs calling from the creek, owls hooting from ancient trees, the rustle of nocturnal creatures moving through underbrush. A sense of peace had gradually settled over her in the months since the wolves' departure. Though questions remained that might never be fully answered, she had come to accept the mystery as part of the gift she and Lily had been given, a glimpse into the interconnectedness of all living things, a reminder that the boundaries between human and wild were more permeable than most people realized. Mrs. Finch joined her on the porch, bringing a thermos of tea and settling into the rocking chair with a contented sigh. It's a beautiful night, she observed. It is, Nora agreed. I was just thinking about how much has changed since last year. The elderly woman nodded, her gaze drifting to the sleeping child. She won't remember any of it consciously, you know. She's too young. But it will be there, somewhere deep inside her, shaping how she sees the world. I've been keeping a journal, Nora said, recording everything while it's still fresh in my memory, so I can tell her when she's older. A wise decision, Mrs. Finch approved. Stories are how we make sense of the extraordinary, how we pass on the knowledge that matters most. They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping tea and listening to the night sounds. Then, from far in the distance, carried on the spring breeze, came the faint but unmistakable howl of a wolf, a single, sustained note that spoke of wild places and ancient connections. Lily stirred in her sleep, a small smile touching her lips, as if she were dreaming of running through moon-dappled forests alongside silver-furred companions. Nora stroked her daughter's hair, wondering what echoes of this experience would remain as she grew, what unexpected paths it might lead her down. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Finch said softly, "The gift she has, whether it fades or transforms as she grows, it's precious. It connects her to something most of us have forgotten, something we once all shared." I worry sometimes, Nora confessed, about how others might react if they knew, about whether she might feel different or isolated because of it. All truly special people face that challenge, Mrs. Finch replied, but she has you to guide her, to help her understand that being different isn't something to fear, but to cherish. She paused, considering. And she has the knowledge that somewhere, moving through distant valleys and over moonlit ridges, there are wild creatures who recognize her spirit, who once spoke with her in a language beyond words. The wolf's howl came again, joined now by others, the voice of the pack rising in harmony, their song traveling miles through the clear night air to reach the small porch where 3 humans sat, 2 listening with their ears, 1, perhaps, with her heart. Nora closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine the wolves in their new territory, strong, free, and safe. The mother wolf would be teaching her now grown pup the ways of the wild, passing on the wisdom of generations. Perhaps, sometimes, when the wind blew from the direction of Pinewood Valley, she too remembered the strange connection forged in storm and danger, the night when the boundaries between their worlds had temporarily dissolved. I think, Nora said slowly, opening her eyes to the star-filled sky, that even if Lily never consciously remembers, The wolves changed something in her, awakened something that most of us lose as we grow up, the ability to see beyond our human perspective, to recognize the consciousness in other beings. Mrs. Finch smiled, her aged face serene in the porch's dim light. That, my dear, is a gift beyond price in a world that too often forgets we are just one species among many, all sharing the same precious planet. Lily sighed in her sleep, turning to nestle more securely against her mother's chest. Overhead, a shooting star traced a brief, brilliant path across the heavens, a fleeting reminder of how rare and wonderful moments of true connection could be. The wolves' howling gradually faded, the distance between them and Pinewood Valley too great even for their powerful voices to traverse. But something of their wild spirit remained, in the night air, in the rustling leaves of the forest, and perhaps most of all, in the heart of a small child who had, for a brief and magical time, spoken their ancient language,